Yes. Thank you, everyone. Hi. Can we please settle down so that we can begin? So we're supposed to get the electricity back. So if everything cuts, please don't panic. My name is Okuhle Botwana. I am an MA candidate at the politics department, and I will be facilitating the seminar today. Our guest speaker is Dr. Cambray, a former Rhodes University student with a BSc undergraduate degree, BSc honors, and holds a Rhodes University PhD. His research focused on indefinite techniques for creating meat, also known as iqhilika. Dr. Cambray converted the subject of his PhD research in biotechnology into a thriving business enterprise. He is the director of Makana Meadery, a company that started off as a biotechnology product aimed to develop a state-of-the-art fermentation technology for producing iqhilika. His patented research has led to the commercialization of the first known traditional African beverage, as I've mentioned, iqhilika, which has also led to the empowerment and employment of previously disadvantaged individuals in the Eastern Cape. The technology is based on a Khoisan method using honey, roots of herbs that contain the yeast, and he uses bee-collected pollen rather than the bee larva in a tower fermenter. According to his LinkedIn profile, his personal interests are in the renewable energy sector and sustainable living field. So if you could help me, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Cambray. Thank you.
Yeah, recording now.
This recording just come through. Is it? Thank you so much.
I shouldn't have to check in because I've got flu.
It's like,
yeah.
Not fine.
Get this back. Yeah,
Great.
no, I've got a bad flu. Like, you really don't want to get this flu.
No problem. So we're going to speak, I think, for 30 minutes so that we will do questions.
Perfect.
Yes. So
How do I make things go forward and backwards?
Yeah.
Yes, with the it's with the mouse.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thanks for that. Just checking if this thing was on. Greetings, everybody. Do you see the quote that I've put there about the tragedy is not that things are broken, the tragedy that it is nothing is done to fix it. Do you guys think you can fix South Africa? Your generation. Are you up to the challenge? Because it's a big challenge. Because this country is seriously screwed. I mean, it's not like broken a little bit. It is, if you take like a 1970s Skodonk car and you break all the electronics on it and you try and start it, you have to pull it with a donkey or something. That's where South Africa is. So you guys have a really big job ahead of you to fix this country. And I'm going to be quite brutal with my presentation. I know that you've had a couple of people here that have spoken to you that have been part of breaking our machine and messing our country up. And they don't even realize how badly they did it because they are in denial. So this will be a very honest look at how your generation can fix this country and what you have to look at in terms of your strengths, because you're all in politics, I assume. And being in politics, you are going to be directing the flow of energy in this country towards solutions that can fix it, or in the continent. I'm sure there are people from other countries in Africa here too. How do I make this thing at the top go away? Do you know the... I'm a Mac person. Should be okay if it's too much of a hassle. Okay, so how many of you have been to the Rhodes Library, to the place where they store the PhDs or the master's thesis? So down in the dungeon, there's shelves and shelves and shelves of PhDs and master's theses, and they sit there and they never move for years and years and years. Nobody ever opens them. Basically, somebody spends 2 or 3 years of their life. They write up a book, they hand it in, they get graded, and that thing never gets read again. It'll Great. Okay. So that's back. We've dealt with Eskom's little intervention. So was that inconvenient? And if we do that all the time through the rest of your lives, how many hours of your life are going to be entirely wasted? And if you compare that to China or India, where they're solving these problems, are the Chinese or Indians going to outcompete you? Yeah. So at the moment, we have a tidal wave of stupidity that is destroying our country. We need to end that because this load shedding thing is entirely unacceptable. So with my PhD, I'm a biotechnologist. I like fermentation. And I was fascinated with the traditional African mead called Kulika because my parents' gardener stole my beehive to make Kulika. So I asked him, Guru, why did you do that? And he gave me some of the stuff and we got wrecked on it. And I thought, okay, cool. That's quite an interesting thing. So then I made quite a bit of Kulika. I used to take it to parties and people used to get really, really plastered on it. We realized this was something different. This was a very strong type of alcohol and had a different effect. So I had a PhD, I had a friend who later became my PhD supervisor, which was Dr. Winston Lukes. And he said, why don't you do your honors project on Kulika? So I did that. And then I did a master's that I upgraded to a PhD. And the idea was to build a factory. Because, you know, if you look in academia, you're often told that you need to publish. Papers don't do any work. They do nothing. So when you publish something, you take an idea out of the world and you destroy it because you make it public domain. So you take a technology, let's say you invent a cure for cancer. If you go and publish that cure, you've made it so that somebody else cannot patent it and protect it and invest the $2 or $3 billion that are needed to take that to the market. So in Africa, we have to be very careful with the way we think about publishing and perishing. There's always this thing in academia, publish or perish. You're supposed to publish lots and lots of papers and give your ideas to everybody for free. That's a really stupid thing to do because, you know, you get a little naughty badge from the university of 130,000 Rand for destroying an idea because as soon as you published it, it cannot be patented and nobody will invest the money in turning your idea into something useful. So I've grown up in an academic family and I'm aware of how academics think. I've grown up in a university town. I know how they think. And I'm also aware of the fact that there are certain limitations to that way of thinking. So my publication was to build a factory, a real living, breathing factory. And that factory employs people and it exports Kulika to America where it earns Forex. So we buy honey from beekeepers all over South Africa. And we use that honey to make a product that we export to America. So I'm actually paying people in a place like in Konduli or in Kosi Bay or all these different places we get honey, I'm paying people with Forex that they're earning through harvesting their biodiversity with bees and selling me honey. And that's an incredible achievement because we have a lot of biodiversity in South Africa. We have a lot of people and the people are very underskilled. So beekeeping is something that underskilled people can do without completely destroying it. So you can basically get honey from rural areas. People can earn enough money to buy the grandkid. Most of the people I work with are gogos. They can buy enough money to buy their grandkid a school uniform or something. So now your money that you're bringing in from overseas is contributing to the future of our country because it's contributing to education. And that's essentially where you want to look at trying to pitch what you do. Well, I think. So my philosophy that I've realized is that technology changes lives and the right technology changes lives well. So, you know, if you go about something the wrong way, which I did when I was 22 and trying to start a business, you learn a lot of lessons because you think that you're Superman and you realize quite quickly that you're not. So if you start off anything that you do in life and you have an aim to create a lot of jobs in South Africa, you will fail. You'll die because our population is largely unemployable. So never get caught in that dream that the government tries to peddle people that to start a business, you need to create 1,000 jobs. If you create 1,000 jobs, you will not sleep. You'll end up with gray hair like mine. You'll be hugely stressed. What you need to do is to create quality jobs. You have to create the jobs for the best people that you find. And those people will pull a couple of other people with them. But if you go out and try and save the world by creating 1,000 jobs or 10,000 jobs or whatever, you will die. And the other thing is to make a business as simple as possible, with the highest profit margins. So I have a friend, Gugu Mkhangu, that I'm chatting to at the moment, and she wants to start a fish farm producing tilapia for Woolworths. And I said, your profit margin is 20%. And if you factor in labor uncertainty and all the mess that we've got in South Africa, the chances are you're going to be losing money, because the guys aren't going to pitch on Monday, and then your fish will die, and you'll lose all your money, and you're not going to make any money. So if you're trying to get a profit margin of 20%, you will die in South Africa. You need to look at 50, 60, 100% profit margin. And you need to make your business as simple as possible. Now, you can see when we're talking about something like Eskom, which is a very complicated machine, and that's a business, and it is a business that is steered by people that have been elected. In other words, they have no competence, because an elected person is a person that can tell a good story, but they have no evidence that they've actually ever done anything in their life. If you look at all of our politicians, the majority of them are essentially just glorified pastors or thieves. They sell promises and they don't do anything. So you have to look at the fact that you cannot rely on the South African government to do anything, because anything that it touches will fail. So if you have somebody from government coming and giving you a talk and telling you how to run a business, they haven't run a business. They've destroyed South Africa. So you can't learn anything. And, if you've got people from the DTI or, sorry, what's happening? Sierra. Sorry, what's happening? Sorry, I can't hear. On top of the word, huh? Okay. Is there a problem? So the single biggest factor that you have to understand in South Africa when you're working with anything, trying to make something work, is that you have an incredible penalty of stupidity that will stand in your path. You have politicians that do not understand anything. You have their junior minions that sit below them that just aren't listening when you speak to them. So there's a problem in South Africa where people don't focus. There's a lot of attention deficit disorder. People sit and they're thinking about the next party they're going to have, and they're not actually focusing on where you are right now. If you go to Asia or the East, you give a speech to a bunch of people in India or a bunch of people in China, they're focused. And at the end of the conversation, people are asking you questions that are relevant. One of our problems that we have in South Africa is that people don't focus. And if you don't focus, you don't have a future, because focusing is what gives you an idea of where you're going. So what I'm going to do is to look at, okay, so when I started my meadery up here at the old power station in Grahamstown, I employed 18 staff. And we used to bottle clear liquor, we used to label it ourselves, we used to export it in bottles. And the problems that I had were that people were constantly stealing the product. They would steal product, add water, and then think that I wouldn't notice, and then the product would turn into vinegar. We had a lot of quality control issues due to human resource problems. So what I did is I had to slowly work backwards and remove all of the problems that are typical in South Africa from that. And I had to look at how do we make our process safe, and how do we provide our customers in the States and China with the best possible product. And what we learned was just to put it in wooden barrels like this. So this is where we've moved the meadery to, is now on a farm outside town. It's in a very remote area. We don't have the problems that we had when we were closer to Grahamstown. And we put the critica into those wooden barrels, and then we roll the barrels into a shipping container. You can see this was after myself and Kondile on the right hand side with the blue top, and Bongani behind him with the main men there. Temba, he does the driving of the bakkie. And then we had another guy who had come in. He was related to someone in the farm that helped us just loading these things. So basically 5 people Normally, my friend Andrew would be there as well. 5 people loaded a shipping container. That's 1.8 million rands worth of meat that we loaded in 3 hours by hand. And the amount of work that goes into that is about 3 days' work. So we've got a very low labor intensity, very reliable business model that produces a product that gets loaded into a shipping container. And you'll see on the left is that 40-foot shipping container. So that's a, what's that, a 12-meter shipping container. And on the right is our new meadery building. You'll see the old building in the background and the new building in the front. So we built a world-class facility with the idea to make this a center for the idea of how to add value to ecosystems through exporting products that come from our land. So these are some of our products that we do in the States. If you look at the evolution of the spice route, Europeans started trying to trickle around Africa sort of 400 or 500 years ago. And they would have to stop here in places like Algoa Bay, and they would have to wait for the trade winds so that they could get along the wild coast and get to India. Well, they'd normally go and wait in Mozambique for a while and then get to India. And during that time, they interacted with people in South Africa who told them all these stories about things like the Impundulu and the Tokolosh and Grootsslang. Grootsslang is a koi snake that lives in a hole up in the Orange River. And so we thought, is this still working? Okay. What spices do you guys put on your food when you cook? And I'm asking this question because you're going to have to do a lot of cultural introspection about this. So before Europeans started bringing spice from India to Africa, what spices did our people put on their food? Okay, so mtati, right? When you're cooking beef at a traditional function, you put the beef on an mtati tree and it gives it that lovely flavor. On the what's the other one? The olive tree, I've just forgotten the name, the one with the gray leaves. There are a lot of spices that we have in South Africa that people here have forgotten how to use. So we have more spices in Southern Africa than there are in India. Yet not a single one of those spices is commercialized. If you go up to the Mazwi Museum and you walk around the front there, you'll see a thing that's got these white flowers and it looks like thyme. That is African thyme. And if you cook with that, it's way nicer than using rosemary or anything else like that. So we have a lot of herbs and spices in Africa that actually are really valuable. Yet when the Europeans were stopping here on their way to India to go and get the well-known herbs and spices, they didn't even realize that they were actually far closer and far easier to access herbs and spices that could have been turned to money. So luckily they didn't do that. And so now for the rest of your lives, you've got a hell of a good opportunity to commercialize African spices. Think of it. What product can you buy in Pick and Pay that actually comes from Africa? Go to the veggie section. Is there a single African vegetable for sale? Yet Gogo used to eat squamba, she ate all these different things. And if you look at your Gogos, they are very strong. Those women are carrying 50 kilograms of wood on their head when they're 80 with a bucket of water on top and a great grandkid on their back. And they eat squamba and emifino. There's magic in those things. Why can't we buy those things at Pick and Pay or at Woolworths? There's something wrong with the way we think as a country. So I try to look through the sunglasses that we have and look at how do we empower ourselves through looking at things that we didn't realize we had. So what does this have to do with energy? So a PhD is a doctor of philosophy. That means I should be able to think. And what I'm thinking about in my life project is how do we make Africa better using technology that empowers people to have meaningful lives? So if you're putting a shovel in somebody's hand and saying, look, you can go and fix potholes in the road, that's not a meaningful life because that doesn't empower the person in any way to feel proud of themselves. Sure, they get a little bit of money and they can buy a bottle of Old Brown Sherry or whatever, but that is not creating a future. You have to light the fire of pride in somebody's heart So they feel proud about where they come from and where they're going in order to create a meaningful life. So I work with bees, and I'm sure how many different cultures. I know we've got Xhosa represented here. We've got Tswana. What else have we got? There must be a lot of different cultures in this room, right? Now, if I ask you, are the bees sacred in your culture? What will most people tell you? So if a bee comes into your house, what can you expect? Other than getting stung, but you can expect a visitor. Now, if I tell you that that is the same belief in Ireland as it is here in South Africa among most of our cultures. So Irish people, if a bee moves into their house, they think they're going to have a visitor. All of Africa, you go to Ethiopia, the bees are seen, Lalibela was one of their kings, and Lalibela means he for whom the bees have foretold greatness. So bees are critically important to all of our cultural background. And I work with them. So when I go up into the Congo, I do this little party trick where the people tell me that their bees are really angry. And I just walk up to the hive and I open the beehive, work with the bees. I don't wear a bee suit. I don't do anything. And immediately it breaks through all the cultural misconception barriers, because the people think, well, if the bees accept me, the ancestors have accepted me, therefore they're going to listen to what I'm saying. So I've managed to do incredible things in Lubumbashi and Kinshasa and all these places, in Zambia, Lusaka, Northwestern Province, Malawi, and so on, just because the bees accept me. So, if I'm just some random white guy talking rubbish, people don't listen to me. But if the bees accept me, it means that people view that what I'm saying probably has some significance. So when I finished my PhD on how to create this critical export product, I said, well, how can I use this technology to do something better? And I looked at how to make biofuel, so things like bioethanol from things that we had. And that led to a system where I do some consulting around the world. So if you were to look at that facility, that's a facility that does about 70 million liters a year of ethanol. Guess where it is? Indigenous people. It's in Malawi, in Chikwawa. So below Lake Malawi, there's a big river called the Shire River. And this facility is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it is like, it's horrible. You go there. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's horrible. Like, they don't even have supermarkets. No hospital, nothing. It's just like sticks and stones. And and then you've got this incredible world-class ethanol facility with high quality people running it. So the entire team, all Malawian, and these guys know how to make alcohol. I mean, they really know how to make alcohol. So the cultural knowledge of fermentation. So everybody here, Gogo's taught you how to make kombucha, or your mother or your uncle or somebody, right? And during lockdown, you probably all learned how to make pineapple beer. So there's a natural aptitude for fermentation in Africa. People know how to do fermentation. So this facility, if you look at it, is spotlessly maintained, and making alcohol is really important to the people. And they actually produce 10% of Malawi's fuel at this factory that I was at. And they're about to expand it to do 30%. Well, they are expanding it now. So that is a huge facility. The byproduct of what they're doing there is fertilizer that they can put back on the land, and they also export as an organic fertilizer. And, it was just such an honor for me to go up there and work in a factory that had been, for want of a better word, indigenized. So the way that these guys were running this factory was based upon Malawian principles, mixed with an assorted series of different scientific principles that they had brought in from both their own culture and from India, China, and Europe. So obviously in Grahamstown, we don't have sugarcane. So making ethanol from sugarcane is not an option, but we had an ostrich abattoir here. And so I used to make biodiesel from ostrich fat and crocodile fat and Rhodes cooking oil and Pick and Pay's cooking oil and things like that. And over a couple of years, I did about 500,000 liters. And then the government just made it so difficult. I could actually have ended up in jail. So I stopped. But that was a lot of fun, because I used to drive around in my car and it used to smell like fish and chips. This Land Cruiser of mine would go past and everybody go, oh, it smells like fish and chips. Because, if I was using Steers oil to make the biodiesel that I used, then my engine smelled like Steers. If I was using Nelson Mandela Hall, it smelled like stale samosas. You guys have had this, yeah, it, because, that hall, they use the oil way too much. If I use that one at the top, it's had its name changed. It was a different smell. But yeah, so we had this fun thing. And then I've also consulted in ethanol facilities all over Africa, Mauritius, India. In Mauritius, it's been really interesting. And I learned how these fuels are used. So basically what you have is you have a situation where people are using their natural resources to create employment and produce fuel. In Mauritius, they actually produce about 40% of the island's electricity from the byproducts of sugarcane. So if any of you go to Mauritius, you will now see a very fancy country that looks a bit like Cape Town. If you went there 10 years ago, it looks like Grahamstown does now. So they managed to get their act together. They don't have potholes anymore. They have just about zero unemployment. And in a process of 10 years that I've been working there, I've seen that country go from being a complete disaster to actually being pretty impressive. You find that people from Mauritius used to come and study here at Rhodes. Now people from South Africa go and study in Mauritius. You've seen this sort of shift. So we can learn from a country like Mauritius. So when I had my meadery at the old power station, did you know that Grahamstown used to have a power station? Until the year I was born, 1976, this town used to actually not be connected to Eskom. We made our own electricity here. And in 76, Eskom came in and it promised all sorts of things. And then it started having load shedding in the 80s. Did you know that we had load shedding in the 80s? So some of you probably, if you go and look in your digs, you'll find there's like a gray box, and that's a ripple controller. So the last time South Africa had load shedding in the 80s, we put these things into houses that can turn the geysers on and off. Grahamstown still has that infrastructure, but the guys up at Makana don't know what it is. And there was one guy that put a broom against the thing and changed the switch and turned all the geysers in town off. And so most of the houses have now had that thing bypassed. But, when Eskom come and say, oh, we're going to do this amazing thing, we're going to put in a ripple controller. We had that in 1982. So I started thinking, when I chatted to this guy that phoned me from Eskom, he was one of the last 3 switching engineers. That's a guy that connects a power station to the grid. If you do it wrong, you blow up the grid. If you do it right, people have electricity. So this guy said to me, he said, Eskom is like a big train where somebody's put a brick on the accelerator. So this was in 2007 and 2006. And that train is coming to a corner. We don't know when it's going to get to the corner, but we know when it gets to the corner, it will fall and it'll crash. And that's pretty much what happened. And he said, look, but if there's one thing you do, try and, 10 minutes, perfect, that's fine. If there's one thing you do, try and work out a way of getting your town so that it has enough power to run on its own, because Eskom is going to collapse. And so I started looking at this idea of a wind farm, because I thought we've got an old power station, therefore we've got a distribution substation, we could connect the wind farm. Grahamstown's windy as hell. And so 2008, I found a French investor and we were spinning and providing electricity by 2015. Just to put it in context, that wind farm produces more often than not, it produces more power than Makana uses. But they don't pay, Makana doesn't pay for the electricity. So Eskom forces Makana to shut off half of town during load shedding and push the electricity through so they can send it to Volkswagen, who do pay. And when I was doing this wind farm, these French investors came and they said, oh, there's BE requirements. Do you know some black guy that can be our BE partner? And I got really irritated because to me, getting some clown from Johannesburg to become professionally rich at the expense of our community was quite insulting. So I said to them, I said, why don't we rather look at creating a community trust where we can plow, we don't have to have a BE partner, some clown in Joburg. We can actually have the kids that are the future of our town be represented by a trust that plows that money into education. So the Industrial Development Corporation funded that, and that has now paid back its capital, and it is actually putting a huge amount of money. Most of the money that GADRA gets, if you guys know GADRA, GADRA is one of Rhodes' bigger feeders bringing students to the university, is actually coming from that, from the wind farm and other wind farms. And of course, the thing with Grahamstown is it gets windy in the evening and the morning, which is when people need to turn their kettles on. Now, this is the one I get really irritated with. In 2010, I began a project to convert all this wood that working for water cut down into electricity.
The rich people are in the US.
And the target was to produce 3 megawatts of power from wood, and that would have created about 250 jobs. And those would have been jobs over 20 years. And together with the wind farm, we would have had enough power to basically guarantee that Grahamstown would never have had load shedding. And we needed a client to make it bankable. We needed a client to buy 1 megawatt of that power. So we came to Rhodes and we said to the university, we said, if you guys sign on this, the university will guarantee that it'll buy 1 megawatt of power at 67 cents per kilowatt hour with CPIX inflation linked increment every year. And that would have basically meant that the university would never have had load shedding, ever. It would also had unlimited hot water because the power station produces hot water as a byproduct. And it would have created 250 jobs, not bad jobs, good jobs, cutting trees down, loading wood, and people working in the power station and so on. And the university said to me, they said, well, this university is not in the business of producing power, it's in the business of producing knowledge. But that was 150 million rand investment then. And 2 years later, the university had to spend about 100 million rand on generators to try and keep the lights on, and has to put fuel into that all the time. So when I was a couple of years older than you guys then. And one of the things that happens is that older leadership can be very lacking in foresight. So if you want to understand South Africa and understand where we're going, you have to understand the Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is what has happened with Eskom. So in 1998, Eskom lost the equivalent of 10,000 years of experience. That was the top engineers that knew how to build power stations, the ones that built Kusile, Arnott, all those, not Kusile, sorry, Arnott, Kendall, and all those power stations. These guys went overseas because they got fired, because they were the wrong color. And the result was that Eskom lost the ability to manage projects. It actually can't build a power station, which is why it can't do Medupi or Kusile. They just can't seem to get it right because they don't have the skills. You actually have to have very specialist skills to manage a project of that complexity. So if you look at the Dunning-Kruger effect, see this is where I put a lot of our politicians in South Africa, at that little peak right at the beginning, where they think because they got elected, they're clever. So a clever person in South Africa who's got elected doesn't need a blue light brigade because they're inconsequential. If I've been to Houston, I met the mayor of Houston, I met the mayor of Boston. They don't have a blue light brigade. And the economy of Houston, the economy of Boston is bigger than the economy of South Africa. So if the mayor of Houston or the mayor of Boston does not need a blue light brigade, then none of our politicians do. A mayor of one of our little towns having a blue light on their car is basically just putting a blue light on top of an idiot. If they get replaced and die and another person comes in, that person's going to do as bad a job as the person that's currently there. Their lives are not important and do not need a blue light. That's a fact. So we have to move to this lower point where we have enough knowledge to have experience, and we realize that we don't know enough. And then we have to start finding the knowledge to fix our country. And to do that, we have to be quite humble. We have to acknowledge the fact that we've really messed up, the fact that we've promoted idiots to positions where they're unable to do anything. And then we have to build in your generation the knowledge where you guys become experts that can actually fly a country and are not arrogant and think that you're important just because you got elected. And a person who is arrogant is a person who doesn't know how silly they are. So I'm a very humble person because I've made a lot of mistakes. I really have messed up a lot of things. I've been a complete idiot in my life, and I'm quite happy to tell you that. And I'm happy to share with you how not to be an idiot like I was. You can go and be an idiot in your own way. So in terms of lessons that I've learned that are worth sharing at this point, they always say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So in South Africa, in terms of finding meaningful solutions, you cannot go with a top-down approach of telling people this is how you do something. You have to make people think. And I hope I've helped to make you think a little bit today. I know that all of you are already thinking. because otherwise you wouldn't be here. But we have to think the right way to fix our country. So if I were to look at the strengths that I've learned to build South Africa and Africa in general, our people have an aptitude towards biological processes. So you'll notice when I've been talking about power generation, nobody got excited here. You're like, ah. But when I talked about Nkomboti, everybody started getting excited, right? Because that's something that's culturally relevant. You have a technological connection to that. If we talk about bees, everybody's got a connection to that. People can relate. And because you relate, you're willing to understand. And because you're willing to understand, you can add value to it and grow. So, you know, if I were to look at any technology in South Africa, like if you're trying to build a power plant and you have to have a BE requirement for engineers, not going to work. Sorry. It's just not going to work. You know, if you're putting up a wind turbine, which sort of looks after itself and tells you when it has to have its oil changed, it's going to work because people actually like wind turbines. I know the switching engineer that does our wind turbine up here on the hill, and he's a good guy. He's really good at his job. And, you know, they've got an AI that manages the turbines, and, you know, there's not much that can go wrong with those things. So we don't need to force a round peg into a square hole in South Africa. We can actually make a choice not to make the mistakes that other countries have made and go down an expensive route of creating these big power stations. Because if you look at South Africa, how many engineers do we produce? Minutely small number. And those engineers are necessary in the manufacturing sector where they can make things that earn foreign exchange, like Volkswagen cars and Mercedes-Benzes. If we take those engineers out and we put them into a power station to make electricity that we don't need because it's going to put a carbon penalty on us and we won't be able to export our products, that's just a stupid allocation of human resources. So the thing that I would really like to say, because you guys are all in the, I assume, in the political field, and therefore you will be steering this country in the next 20, 30, 40 years, however long it takes, this continent, is we have to look at our strengths. So, and we need to work on that. So we're good at being happy in Africa. To be honest, if you go around the world, you go to Europe, the people are miserable. I was in Germany last year. Yes. And people don't smile. You know, you go to Russia, they really don't smile. In India, people are friendly if you're doing business. So, you know, as long as money is flowing around, people are friendly. And that's how you interact socially in India. In China, the people have such an instinctive distrust of people that are not from China that often you find that they're very unfriendly. But I actually really like the Chinese. I find the Chinese to be a very honest, happy, hardworking people. And if I were to look at where we would probably best align our interests as a continent, I would think it's probably going to be India and China. Now, if you look at the Critica that we sell in America, we're selling a bottle of culture. When you buy a Castle Lager in South Africa, what are you buying? Ask yourself, what is it? Have we got a castle in South Africa? Who was Charles Glass? Carling Black Label. What is that? You know, we are so culturally distanced from ourselves. Why can you not buy squamba in Pick and Pay? You can buy Swiss chard, which is spinach. You can buy cabbage that comes from Germany. You can buy potato that comes from South America. You can buy carrot that comes from Afghanistan. But you cannot buy anything that comes from here. And I would love it as a challenge to you guys that in terms of harvesting our energy in the future, building a sustainable Africa, we need to look at projects that convert our natural resources into energy. So biomass to energy projects. We need to look at projects that convert our biodiversity into export products, spices and so on. People should be paying a lot of money. Do any of you know, there's this plant in Xhosa, I've just forgotten the name, but it's essentially, it translates to white woman's boobs. It's got these pointy thorns on it. And these plants, when the Victorian women were walking around, they wore wire bras that made their breasts pointy. So the tree is called that because it was just like a funny joke that people thought. But that is Szechuan pepper, but it's better than the Szechuan pepper that comes from China. And Szechuan pepper in China is a $5 billion industry. Yet nobody knows that we even have this in South Africa. I sort of discovered it by mistake, but people don't use it as a spice. But we have a better version of a spice that's worth $5 billion in China.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cambray, for the great presentation. I guess we can be these aspiring aspects that can, I guess, get rid of load shedding if maybe the government could invest more in education and not defund students, so we can get maybe more biotechnologists and more engineers. And clever politicians. I'm not sure about that, but so we're gonna open up the floor for a few questions. We have about 13 minutes left, so I'm gonna have 3 rounds of questions, and so my colleague here is gonna help me pass around the mic. So I'm gonna take 4 hands for the first round. We already have 1 here. I don't know if there's any more hands to ask. Okay, there's 2 there. That's number 2 at the back. 3 here, 1 more. And Prof. Magala at the end. So here is there the other mic. Where's the other mic? Okay.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Doc. I think I just need to know what kind of difficulties you've met with in trying to produce this alternative energy, because at the base of your presentation, you have offered some light, or you have shed some light into, some other solutions into this crisis that we have now, as using the resources that we have in producing alternative energy. But then again, what kind of challenges that you've met with in the terms of, the red tape and stuff like that from these, clever politicians? Thank you.
So how do I make this not make, is it working? Okay, so thanks for the question. I must tell you a really funny story. So when we started the wind farm, we went to Makana municipality and we presented to their head engineer the fact that we were going to start this wind farm. And at the end of the presentation, the guy comes to my investor and he says, Grahamstown doesn't have any electricity. How much power is it going to use to turn these fans? Genuine. Literally, the head of engineering in Makana thought that we were putting wind turbines on the hill to make wind for Grahamstown. So, one of the biggest things that we have to overcome is that there's a huge amount of sort of really entrenched stupidity in our government. And overcoming that is extremely frustrating. And then the other thing that you have is you've got these NIMBYs, they're not in my backyard crowd. So you've got a very small, volatile, vocal sort of minority in the country that have a reason why nothing should happen. And I mean, we had something like 20,000 people that tried to oppose this wind farm that we put up. And each one of those people, to manage them, you have to pay 500 Rand. Because when the environmental impact assessment company charges 500 Rand per interested and affected party. So we had 20,000 interested and affected parties. We had some guy from Kenton who came and said the wind farm in Kenton would chase his tourists away because nobody would want to see those huge turbines in the hill. If you go to Kenton and you look vaguely towards Grahamstown, if you've got very good eyes, you can almost see the turbines. So the biggest problem is people, and it's a very difficult thing. So you just have to have a skin that's as thick as a rhino's, and you'll get through. Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Hi, sir. Thank you for that talk. I was wondering, your product, you say you mainly export it to China and the US, and I understand that those are the two biggest markets for alcohol. Do you find that there is a market for traditional South African liquors, or is you not selling in South Africa purely because the red tape involved? Or...
That's a very interesting question. People in South Africa are not proud of their origin, not proud of their culture. So if you sell products that are branded as being based on a traditional technology, if you speak, often I give people a lot of lifts in my chat, and I tell them that I make Critica, and they laugh at me and they say, no, that's what the old people drink, and it's seen as being a very skanky thing. And then I chat to the people and I say, well, is French wine high quality? And everybody says, oh, no, French wine is the best. I say, well, you know how the French make their wine? They, at the end of spending a day picking the grapes, they go and jump around in the grapes, basically swim in it to get the juice out. And the yeast, the first 4% of alcohol that comes out of human grapes is actually human associated yeast, as in candida, which should, when any of the girls here hear that word, they should get a terrifying feeling of unhappiness. So French wine is not a sophisticated product. Critica is, but people have been taught to not be proud of their roots. And that's the same reason why, nobody sells Imifino and Checkers. So that was the biggest limitation. We have a guy that we're bringing onto our board, quite a famous person, in the next couple of weeks. And he's recently become a director of ShopRite Checkers. And we've approached him looking at how we could get our product with more exposure in South Africa. But I think that'll take 2 or 3 more years of people learning to be proud about South Africa as such. Yeah. So thanks for the good question.
Do you think that that is the way to solve the energy crisis in South Africa? Using people like you, and by that I mean businesses that have nothing to do with the government, in solving the energy crisis in South Africa?
With you on that. Look, I have had interaction with government. Ooh, sorry about that. And I found that every time I had interaction with government, it sort of left me feeling a bit worse than better, and financially far worse than better. So I think if you're trying to do, as with anything in the world, government is sheltered employment for people that can't hack it in the real world. So, if you want to be successful as an entrepreneur in South Africa, getting a organization that has never run a business, or any of the businesses that had, it's destroyed them. Because if you look at our government, has destroyed SAA, Eskom, pretty much every business it had is broken. So you do not want the help of the government, because they will destroy your business too. And if you can get grant funding, as long as it doesn't have too many strings attached, I would recommend that. But, I wouldn't take any advice that the government gives you. If you go to one of these DTI or tier things where they tell you how to run a business, they haven't run any businesses, so they can't tell you anything. It's like the government can't help you. They can give you money that they've stolen from somebody that was actually working, but they can't help you, because they don't know how to do that.
Okay, thank you. So what would this mean for the people of South Africa when it's successful, right? In terms of cost and availability to everyone in South Africa?
Well, let's say you decided you wanted to start a small facility producing electricity from the waste plastic at the tip here. You could produce 1 megawatt of electricity from that waste plastic, and you could sell that to whoever you wanted to. Now, if you don't involve government, you'll be an entrepreneur, and people will support you because you're reliable, and you would change the country. So, that's all of your generation. You've got to find cool things and commercialize them. If you look at who's this girl from Limpopo who's made all the money out of the hair products. Come on, everybody should know Portia M. Yeah, You know, she took stuff that was just lying around, you know, marula nuts, and she commercialized it. There are lots of things that we can turn into energy in South Africa that we're throwing away at the moment. We're actually exporting wood to England right now. If you go along all these roads, you can see heaps of logs on the side of the road that are being taken to England to make electricity for the English. It makes no sense. Should be making electricity here. And, you know, if you started a project that employed 100 or 200 people and created local power for a community, be a good thing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cambray. I mean, I think part of what needs to happen is globally is a shift in a definition of success. So what we've normalized is a definition of success that is based on plunder. So that's why it's normal that many white men own islands and some white men go on adventure trips costing thousands and thousands to go and look at the ruins of the Titanic as hundreds of Africans are sinking in the ocean, right? So what I'm asking you, and so in a way you're saying to us, so we can see that the state is sinking and it is the African who's going to crash with that state. There's an activist, Tessa Dooms, whose video is circulating, and there she says, your friend in ESCOM used the example of the train. Tessa Dooms uses the example of a car. We're watching this car going off a cliff, and the driver, we know, they don't know how to drive. They probably bought their license. And we're hoping that as soon as they get to that cliff, the closer they get, they will wake up. But we know that they likely won't do that. And we go off the cliff with them. But of course, for the African, we still need the state for whatever, for better or worse. Most of these young people that are here who are funded by the state, some who can come to the university, rely on the state for a public good. They still need the state to catch them for better or worse. So the question I have for you is could you speak to us about some examples of young Black people that you know of, that you work with, that you've supported to build sustainable businesses where they're able to create quality jobs for themselves and others in the community? Most young people across this continent know that we can't rely on the state. I think most of us know that we need something else, but we don't have the thing to begin. So can you give these young people an example of what that looks like, of young people like themselves who have done this, who've created these sustainable businesses? Thanks.
Thank you. That was a beautiful question, and it's something that is very important to me. The first thing, what we have to fix Africa is we have to create a capital class. So capital class are intelligent people that believe in themselves, that have the ability to create wealth and create employment. So essentially, that's what we have to do. And I don't believe that it takes a lot of money to do that. It takes a lot of drive. And if I were to say the single biggest thing that I've seen that is missing in people in South Africa and in Zambia and so on that I've worked in, is people are not proud of themselves. So you can't be confident unless you're proud of yourself. So, if you go and stand in front of a bunch of venture capitalists and say, look, I need $100 million to do this, and you're not confident, they're not going to invest in you. So you get the kids that go to St. Andrews and they learn how to do fake confidence, and that's always been the trick that the private schools have taught, is how to have this sort of that cocky attitude. But I believe that there's a real confidence that is lurking in every single person in our continent, and that confidence has to be unlocked. And there was a lovely chap that I worked with years ago called Boy Nyebeleza. So Boy is completely uneducated in the official sense, as in he's never been to school. But he lives next to a forest, and he was one of the beekeeping guys that I trained in near Mazeppa Bay. And we had 100 people that we trained. Boy was the only success out of that group. And that's his name, Boyi. And Boy would get honey for me, and he'd WhatsApp me, and I'd get this scrambled message that no, something, and then I'd ask somebody to phone him and find out what he was trying to say, and he said, no, he's got like 500 kgs of honey. So I'd drive up there and buy it, and I helped him open a bank account. And because he had proof of sale, and one of his sales was actually export, so my US guys came out and actually deposited money directly from the States into his account. He was able to go to Toyota's small business finance division, and they funded him buying a little Toyota Hilux, like a really old Skadonk Hilux, but it was, you know, it had wheels and it moved forward and backwards. And so then Boy started riding traditional medicine and goats and sheep to Cape Town. And he came back, you know, with things that he got from Cape Town that he was able to sell in his community. I don't actually know what those things were because I never saw him coming back, but he's actually become quite a successful businessman. So that was one example. And then another example is my favorite, which is Pumlani Honi, H-O-N-I. So when I started my business, my beehive was always getting stolen. And Pumlani came to me and he said, no, he was on a farm. He said, no, he'll make sure that the donkey people don't steal my bee. And so Pumlani has not been a successful businessman as such, but he has been remarkably successful in terms of the different things he's done. You know, he's the head ranger at Pumba. At the moment he's working with Kim Weber. He's gone from being the guy that had a standard 3 education to being a guy that can actually read, and he's been to Canada. He's worked around the world. He's a really good, amazing guy. He's bought his own little car, does bee removals as a business. But that is not a huge step, but for Pumlani, it is a huge step. And so those would be my 2 favorite examples. Obviously, there are lots of students that I've interacted with over the years who've been far more successful. But, you know, you get a big stepping stone if you come to the university. You know, you can step from here into capital class quite easily. Whereas from a rural background, Boy would probably be my best story. Yeah, it was when I saw him with his little Toyota, all the medicines and pepu and all this sort of thing in it. Another question: why can't you buy him pepu at Pick and Pay?
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Because of time, we'll end here.
Hi, before you go, we still have a few minutes. Just give me 2 minutes. Please have a seat. I would like to thank, on behalf of the politics department, to thank Dr. Cambray, to thank all the speakers, the 3 other speakers that joined us this week for this conversation about the energy crisis. When we began on Monday with the first years introducing you to international relations, I made the argument that the history of the discipline is really the disaster or the crisis of the First World War, where it became clear to scholars that war is not an issue to be left to diplomats or to soldiers. I think what has come up this week is that the energy crisis is not an issue to be left to engineers. As many of the speakers have said, it is a question of leadership, but it is also a question of courage. And what is at stake with all of these examples that we've been given of a car that is driving us, heading us off a cliff? What is at stake is not only your future, what is at stake is the future of this planet. So we have to do our work. And I appreciate the speakers for helping us to label what the problem is so that we may begin to think ourselves out of this crisis. I want to thank my colleagues who have organized this teaching series this year, which is Dr. Bongani Nyoka and Dr. Cecilia Nedziwe. Please give them a round of applause. I would like also to thank Ms. Benita Rama, whom I don't see here, who did the travel and accommodation arrangements for the speakers. Also, thank you to our colleagues from the communications division And thank you to the colleagues from the IT division, Ayanda Mlambo and his team, who've helped us to connect other people that have wanted to listen in these conversations. But most of all, thank you to you students for coming here and really for taking our speakers to task, for calling them complicit. It takes courage, but it does demand that, because it is your future that is at stake. It is your dreams that are at stake. So thank you very much.
That was a good